Have you ever replayed a conversation 50 times, only to realize the other person probably forgot it 5 minutes later? You send a message, then you read it again and again. Then an hour later, you read it one more time. Did that sound arrogant? Was that sentence too harsh? Did they misunderstand me? Should I have added another explanation? Maybe I shouldn't have sent it at all. Now it is 1:17 in the morning. Your body is tired. Your eyes burn. The conversation ended. Hours ago, nothing new is happening, yet inside your mind, the meeting is still taking place. The argument is still unfolding. The decision is still being debated. The future is still being negotiated. And if you are honest, this does not happen once in a while. It happens constantly. You finish one worry and immediately begin another. You solve one problem and the mind manufactures a replacement. You tell yourself you are being responsible, careful, thoughtful, prepared. But beneath all those respectable names is a private exhaustion that few people talk about. An exhaustion that follows you into prayer. An exhaustion that sits beside you during Dhikr. Or an exhaustion that survives even after you have turned back to Allah. Most people think overthinking means you care too much. Ibn Arabi would say something far more unsettling. He would say the problem is not that your mind is active. The problem is that your heart has quietly stopped trusting. And when trust weakens, the mind begins trying to perform a job Allah never gave it. It starts attempting to control outcomes that belong only to Him. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why overthinking becomes a spiritual disease, why it survives even in sincere religious people, and the forgotten Sufi cure that Ibn Arabi's tradition points toward. In this video, we are going to look at 6 very specific things. First, we will uncover why overthinking feels responsible even when it is secretly exhausting your soul. Then we will see the hidden fear that keeps the mind running long after the problem is gone. Then Ibn Arabi will reveal why your thoughts are not actually the deepest part of you. After that, we will discover the shocking reason some overthinking is actually disguised: self-importance. Then we will uncover the spiritual faculty Allah gave you that is deeper than analysis. And finally, we will learn a practical Sufi method for leaving mental prison without becoming careless. Because the goal is not to think less. The goal is to stop asking the mind to do what only trust can do. We live in a psychological environment that no previous generation has experienced. You carry more information in your pocket than entire civilizations once possessed. Every day you see thousands of lives, thousands of opinions, thousands of examples of people succeeding, failing, marrying, divorcing, becoming wealthy, becoming famous, becoming forgotten. Your attention is constantly surrounded by possibilities, and every possibility creates another question. What if I choose wrong? What if I miss something? What if there is a better option? What if Allah is warning me and I am not seeing it? The result is that many people now live almost entirely inside their heads. They mistake mental activity for spiritual clarity. But Ibn Arabi approached the human being very differently. In the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he repeatedly explains that the human being contains multiple faculties of perception. The intellect, what he calls the AKL, is a gift, but it is not the highest authority within you. There is also the qalb, the heart, not the physical, organ, not emotion, the spiritual heart, the faculty through which deeper realities are perceived. The tragedy begins when the intellect attempts to occupy a position it was never designed to hold, when analysis becomes the ruler rather than the servant, when thinking attempts to replace trust, Modern psychology has observed something remarkably similar. Researchers studying rumination found that repetitive thinking often creates the feeling of progress without producing actual solutions. The mind mistakes repetition for movement. You feel busy, you feel productive, yet nothing changes. Ibn Arabi described the spiritual version of this centuries earlier. The nafs becomes convinced that one more thought will finally create certainty. One more analysis, one more scenario, one more mental rehearsal, but certainty never arrives, because certainty was never hiding inside the next thought. It was hiding inside surrender. Most Islamic advice about overthinking ends with a simple instruction: have tawakkul, and that advice is true. But Ibn Arabi asks a deeper question. Why do some people secretly find worry easier than trust? Why does anxiety sometimes feel safer than surrender? And what part of us is actually refusing to let go? To answer that question, we need to begin with something most overthinkers never realize. They are not addicted to thinking, they are addicted to something else. Think of a 28-year-old accountant, reliable, organized, respected at work. Yesterday, he delivered an important presentation. The meeting is over. The decision has already been made. Nothing can be changed. Yet when he arrives home, he opens his laptop, not because he has work to do, because he wants to revisit the presentation. Again, he imagines different sentences, different answers, different facial expressions, different outcomes. Hours pass. The meeting ended yesterday, but inside his mind, it is still happening. He believes he is being responsible. What is actually happening is something very different. He is mentally editing a movie that has already been released. Have you ever done this? Replayed a conversation, rewritten an argument, rehearsed a future interaction 20 times before it happened. Notice something. The mind rarely says, "I want control." It uses more respectable language. It says, "I am being careful. I am being wise. I am preparing." But beneath those explanations is a hidden assumption. If I think long enough, uncertainty will disappear. And this is where Ibn Arabi enters the conversation. Throughout the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, Ibn Arabi returns repeatedly to the reality of ubudiyya, servanthood, not as a humiliating condition, as a liberating one, because the servant is only responsible for what belongs to the servant. Action, effort, intention, sincerity, the outcome belongs to Allah. The result belongs to Allah, the future belongs to Allah, the hearts of people belong to Allah, the unfolding of events belongs to Allah. But the overthinking mind quietly rebels against this arrangement. Not openly, not consciously, it simply starts behaving as though outcomes are its responsibility, and once that happens, peace disappears. Imagine sitting in the passenger seat of a car. The driver is qualified, experienced, completely capable, yet every 30 seconds you reach across and grab the steering wheel. You tell yourself you are helping. You are not helping. You are creating danger. This is exactly what happens when the servant repeatedly tries to seize control over what Allah has reserved for himself. Modern psychology calls this the illusion of control. Researchers have found that human beings consistently overestimate their influence over uncertain situations. We believe more mental effort equals more control. We believe more analysis equals more certainty, but uncertainty remains. Science describes what is happening. Ibn Arabi tells you what to do about it, because Ibn Arabi's solution is not merely psychological. It is spiritual. He reminds you of your station, and surprisingly, that station is freedom. You do not have to carry tomorrow. You do not have to manage every possibility. You do not have to calculate every outcome. Allah never asked you to. Think about how much of your mental energy is spent attempting to solve problems that do not yet exist. Imaginary conversations, imaginary disasters, imaginary judgments, imaginary futures. You call it preparation, but preparation ends when action becomes impossible. After that point, it becomes something else. It becomes resistance to dependence. And here is what most people miss. The mind is not trying to solve uncertainty. The mind is trying to eliminate dependence. Because dependence feels vulnerable. Trust feels vulnerable. Servanthood feels vulnerable. The ego would rather exhaust itself than admit that some doors can only be opened by surrender. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you stopped thinking because you reached certainty? You probably did not. You stopped because exhaustion finally forced you to. That is the evidence. The next thought was never going to save you. The next thought was only feeding the cycle. Ibn Arabi spent years exploring the human relationship with Allah, and again he arrived at the same conclusion. Peace does not come from expanding your control. Peace comes from recognizing its limits, because the moment you try to become the owner of outcomes, you inherit a burden you were never designed to carry, and that burden will crush you. Overthinking begins where servanthood becomes difficult. But if overthinking is really about control, then why does the mind cling to it so desperately? What fear is hiding underneath the need to control? Think of a 23-year-old woman sitting on the edge of her bed. Her phone is beside her. She sent a message to a close friend 3 hours ago. No reply, nothing unusual has happened. No argument, no conflict, no evidence of a problem. Yet she has checked her phone 30 times. Every silence becomes a possibility. Maybe they are upset. Maybe she said something wrong. Maybe she disappointed them. Maybe the friendship is changing. Maybe this is the beginning of rejection. The mind begins constructing entire worlds from a single unanswered notification. And what makes this fascinating is that the suffering is happening without facts. The pain is real. The story is imagined. Have you noticed how often this happens? A future event appears, a possibility appears, a silence appears, and immediately the mind starts generating explanations, not because it knows, because it cannot tolerate not knowing. This is where Ibn Arabi goes deeper than most discussions about anxiety in the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. He repeatedly speaks about the nature of the qalb. The heart, the Arabic word itself, comes from a root associated with turning and changing. The heart is constantly moving between states. Hope and fear, expansion and contraction, certainty and confusion, nearness and distance. But Ibn Arabi's point is not merely that the heart changes. His point is that the heart requires a stable orientation, and that orientation is Allah. When the heart loses its center, it begins searching desperately for substitutes. One of those substitutes is prediction. The mind starts believing, if I can predict what is coming, I will finally feel safe. But prediction is not safety. Prediction is only prediction. Imagine standing on a small boat in the middle of the ocean. A storm begins, the waves rise, the boat moves, and suddenly you start swinging your arms wildly, trying to calm the water. It feels active, it feels useful, it feels like you are doing something. But the ocean does not care. Your movement changes, nothing. This is what overthinking often becomes. An attempt to calm uncertainty by creating more activity. Now here is where this gets uncomfortable. Many people do not actually want certainty. They want escape from helplessness. There is a difference. Certainty says, I know what will happen. Helplessness says, I do not control what will happen. The second statement is much harder, because it forces the ego to confront its limits. Modern psychology calls this intolerance of uncertainty. Researchers have found that many forms of anxiety are sustained not by danger itself, but by difficulty accepting the unknown. The unknown becomes more frightening than reality. The mind would rather imagine 10 disasters than sit quietly with uncertainty. Ibn Arabi described the spiritual dimension of the same mechanism centuries earlier. The heart, disconnected from trust, begins searching for certainty in places where certainty cannot be found. And so the cycle continues. More analysis, more scenarios, more mental rehearsals, more exhaustion. Yet the future remains hidden, exactly as Allah intended it to remain. Have you noticed something strange? Many people survive failure better than uncertainty. Failure hurts, but at least it is known. Uncertainty keeps the ego suspended, and the ego hates suspension. It wants conclusions, it wants guarantees, it wants control. But Allah designed life differently. He designed it to require trust, not occasionally. Constantly, every day, every decision, every relationship, every prayer. The overthinker often believes the problem is insufficient information. Ibn Arabi would say, the deeper problem is insufficient surrender, because no amount of information can remove the reality that tomorrow belongs to Allah. And the moment you stop demanding guarantees from life, something extraordinary happens. The nervous system begins to soften. The heart begins to breathe. The future stops feeling like an enemy, and uncertainty becomes a place where trust can finally grow. Your mind keeps running because your fear thinks movement is safety. But if fear is not the deepest layer, then what is? What if the real problem is not the thoughts themselves? What if you have spent years fighting something that was never actually you? Imagine a university student sitting after Fajr prayer. The masjid is quiet. The world has not fully awakened. He opens a mushaf, begins reading. Then suddenly a disturbing thought appears, a thought he hates, a thought he never invited, a thought completely opposite to what he believes. Immediately panic enters. Why did I think that? What does that say about me? What if this means my faith is weak? What if this thought reflects who I really am? And now, instead of one disturbing thought, he has 100, not because of the original thought, because he started fighting it, because he assumed it belonged to him. This scene is more common than most people realize. Many sincere believers spend years judging themselves for thoughts they never chose. They assume every mental event is a reflection of their identity. Ibn Arabi dismantles this assumption. In the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he discusses Qawatir, passing thoughts, influences, and inner arrivals that move through human consciousness. Some originate from noble sources, some from lower impulses, some from worldly impressions, some from whispers. But his crucial point is this: the arrival of a thought is not the same thing as ownership of a thought. This distinction changes everything, because most people live as though every cloud belongs to the sky. Imagine standing outside on a windy afternoon. Clouds move across the horizon. Dark clouds, bright clouds, heavy clouds, thin clouds. The sky does not become any of them. It simply allows them to pass. Ibn Araby invites us to see consciousness in a similar way. Thoughts move, thoughts arrive, thoughts depart. The witnessing awareness beneath them remains. Most people spend their lives trying to manage every thought. The Sufi learns something far more powerful. He learns to recognize the observer. This is where another fascinating bridge appears. Modern psychology calls this cognitive diffusion. Researchers found that suffering often increases when people fuse their identity with mental content, not because thoughts are powerful, because identification is powerful. Science describes the mechanism. Ibn Arabi explains the spiritual implication. A thought is not dangerous because it appears. A thought becomes dangerous when it convinces you that it is you. Have you experienced this? A single negative thought appears, then guilt appears, then fear appears, then self-judgment appears. Hours later, you are exhausted. Not because of the original thought, because you built an entire identity around its presence. Ibn Arabi's framework offers enormous relief. You do not need to interrogate every thought. You do not need to defend yourself against every mental image. You do not need to panic every time the mind produces something strange. You simply need to recognize what belongs to you and what is merely passing through. The sky never chases clouds. The ocean never chases waves. The heart does not need to chase every thought. And perhaps this is why so many overthinkers remain trapped. They believe freedom means controlling every thought. But control is still obsession. The deeper freedom is recognition, the recognition that the observer is deeper than the mental noise, the recognition that awareness survives every passing storm, the recognition that your soul is not identical to the contents of your mind. Ask yourself honestly, how many years have you spent arguing with thoughts that would have disappeared if you simply let them pass? How much suffering came not from the thought itself, but from your reaction to it? This is the threshold where many people stop. They discover they are not their thoughts, and they assume the lesson is complete. But Ibn Arabi goes further, much further, because there is one final disguise that overthinking wears. One disguise so subtle that it often appears spiritual. One disguise that survives even inside worship. And this is the part most Islamic content never reaches. A thought can visit your mind without becoming part of your soul. Think of a man in his late 30s. He has not missed Fajr in years. People respect him, his family trusts him, his friends consider him sincere. He gives charity quietly, he avoids major sins. And yet, every night, he lies awake, questioning himself. Was my prayer accepted? Was I showing off? Did I secretly want recognition? Did I say that for Allah, or for my image? Did I help that person because I cared, or because I wanted to feel like a good Muslim? At first, this sounds admirable. It sounds like sincerity. It sounds like self-accounting. But watch closely, because something subtle is happening. Hours pass, days pass, years pass, and his attention remains fixed on one subject: himself, his sincerity, his intentions, his spiritual state, his image, his standing, his progress, his purity. The nafs has discovered something extraordinary. It can survive inside religion. In fact, religion can become one of its favorite hiding places. This is one of the most uncomfortable observations in Ibn Arabi's writings. Throughout the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, he repeatedly warns that the ego does not disappear simply because a person becomes religious. It adapts, it changes language, it changes clothing, it changes appearance, but it remains committed to the same project. keeping itself at the center. Earlier, we spoke about control, then fear, then identification with thoughts. Now all three come together, because what is overthinking ultimately doing? It is keeping your attention fixed on yourself, your future, your image, your certainty, your performance, your outcome, even when the language sounds spiritual. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. You glance at it briefly. That is useful. You check your appearance, then you move on. But imagine standing in front of that mirror for 6 straight hours. Eventually you stop seeing reality. Everything becomes self-reference. Everything becomes self-observation. Everything becomes self-consciousness. This is what happens spiritually. There is a healthy self-awareness. Then there is a form of self-occupation, so intense that it blocks the view of Allah. And here is where many viewers will feel resistance. Because some overthinking feels humble, it feels responsible, it feels pious. But Ibn Arabi forces a difficult question. What if some of your anxiety is not humility? What if it is hidden self-importance? Not arrogance in the obvious sense. Something subtler, the subconscious belief that everything depends on you, your decisions, your performance, your perfection, your ability to avoid mistakes, your ability to maintain complete control. Notice how close that assumption is to the illusion we discussed earlier. The ego says, if I can become perfect enough, then everything will be safe. But perfection never arrives, because Allah never designed life around human perfection. He designed it around human servanthood. This is why some people become exhausted even while trying to be sincere. They are trying to manufacture certainty through self-analysis, and self-analysis has no finish line. One more motive to inspect, one more intention to examine, one more flaw to uncover, one more hidden problem to solve. The mirror never ends. Ibn Arabi's answer is radical. The cure for self-obsession is not better self-obsession. The cure is absorption in Allah, because the closer a person comes to Allah, the less interesting the ego becomes, not because flaws disappear, because the center of attention changes. The servant stops staring at the mirror and starts looking through the window. This creates one of the strangest spiritual experiences. You become more aware of your limitations, yet less anxious about them. More aware of your flaws, yet less obsessed with them. More aware of your need for Allah, yet more peaceful than before. Because the burden of self-creation finally falls away. You stop trying to manufacture yourself and start allowing Allah to guide you. The ego survives by keeping your attention on yourself. But if that is true, then something even more surprising follows. Because the opposite of overthinking is not what most people imagine, and this next insight changes the entire conversation. Most people believe the opposite of overthinking is certainty. That sounds reasonable, after all. If uncertainty creates anxiety, then certainty should create peace. But Ibn Arabi takes a completely different path, and this is where his teaching becomes genuinely transformative. The opposite of overthinking is not certainty, it is friendship with uncertainty. Read that again. Not tolerance, not resignation, friendship. Because certainty about the future belongs exclusively to Allah. No prophet possessed exhaustive knowledge of tomorrow. No saint possessed exhaustive knowledge of tomorrow. No scholar possessed exhaustive knowledge of tomorrow. Only Allah. Yet many people spend their lives demanding from themselves what Allah never demanded from His servants. Perfect prediction, perfect foresight, perfect understanding, perfect guarantees. In the Fusius al-Hakam, Ibn Arabi repeatedly returns to the limits of human knowledge before divine wisdom. The servant sees fragments. Allah sees the whole. The servant sees moments. Allah sees destinies. The servant sees causes. Allah sees realities. The overthinker keeps asking, how can I know enough to finally relax? But that question has no end, because every answer creates another question. Every certainty creates another uncertainty. Every solved problem creates another possibility. The mind cannot win this game. That is why so many intelligent people remain exhausted. They are searching for peace in the wrong place. Ibn Arabi points somewhere else, toward relationship, toward trust, toward surrender, toward tawakkul. The overthinker seeks relief through knowledge. The knower of Allah seeks relief through reliance. One asks, how can I eliminate uncertainty? The other asks, how can I trust Allah inside uncertainty? That question changes everything. Because uncertainty stops being an enemy. It becomes a meeting place. A place where trust becomes real. A place where dependence becomes visible. A place where faith moves from theory into experience. And suddenly you understand something extraordinary. Allah did not leave uncertainty in your life because He forgot about you. He left uncertainty in your life because certainty would have hidden Him. The mind wants guarantees, the heart wants Allah, and only one of those desires leads to peace. The soul does not heal when uncertainty disappears. It heals when trust becomes stronger than uncertainty. Everything we have discussed so far is valuable only if it changes the way you live tomorrow, not next year, not someday, tomorrow, asterisk, because insight without practice quickly becomes another form of overthinking. So let me give you 3 concrete exercises rooted in everything Ibn Arabi has shown us. The first is called the circle of ownership. Tonight, before you sleep, take a piece of paper, draw 2 circles. In the first circle write, what Allah asked from me. In the second circle write, what belongs only to Allah. In the first circle, place effort, intention, preparation, honesty, prayer, action. In the second circle, place outcomes, people's opinions, future events, acceptance, rejection, provision, results. Then look carefully at where most of your mental energy has been going. Many overthinkers spend 90% of their energy inside the second circle, the circle they were never meant to carry. This exercise retrains responsibility, not by making you passive, by making you accurate. The second practice is called name the fear. The next time you catch yourself spiraling, stop the story. Do not analyze the situation. Do not continue the argument inside your head. Instead ask, what am I actually afraid of right now? Not the scenario. The fear beneath the scenario. Maybe it is rejection. Maybe humiliation. Maybe failure. Maybe disappointment. Maybe loss. The mind loves stories. The heart heals when fear becomes visible. The moment fear receives a name, it loses part of its power, because now you are dealing with reality instead of imagination. The third practice is called the witness pause. 3 times each day, 2 minutes each time. Sit quietly, observe. Thoughts, do not suppress them. Do not argue with them. Do not negotiate with them. Simply watch. Let them come. Let them leave. Remember Ibn Arabi's teaching on how passing thoughts are visitors. You are not obligated to follow every visitor home at first. This feels strange. Then something remarkable happens. You begin noticing How much suffering comes not from thoughts themselves, but from attachment to thoughts. And slowly, the observer becomes stronger than the noise. The goal is not an empty mind. The goal is a heart no longer ruled by every movement of the mind. Because freedom is not controlling every thought. Freedom is no longer being controlled by them. Let's return to the person we met at the beginning of this video. It is 1:17 in the morning. The message has already been sent. The conversation already ended. The decision has already been made. Nothing about the external situation has changed. But now something inside has, because now you can see what was really happening. The mind was not trying to solve the problem. It was trying to escape uncertainty. It was trying to secure guarantees Allah never promised. It was trying to carry responsibilities Allah never assigned. And that is why the exhaustion never ended. You thought you needed better answers. What you actually needed was a different relationship with uncertainty. You thought you needed more control. What you actually needed was deeper trust. You thought overthinking was evidence of responsibility. But often it was evidence that the heart had forgotten where responsibility ends and reliance begins. Ibn Arabi spent his life reminding people of something we repeatedly forget. The servant is not weak because he depends on Allah. The servant is strong because he depends on Allah. The future was never placed in your hands, and that is not bad news. That is mercy, because the moment you stop demanding certainty from yourself, you become available to something greater than certainty. Trust, and trust creates a peace that analysis can never reach. So, before you leave this video, I want you to sit with one question. Think about the uncertainty that occupies the most space inside your mind right now. The relationship, the decision, the future, the fear. Now ask yourself, honestly, have I been seeking Allah inside this uncertainty? Or have I been trying to replace Him with control? And remember this: the soul finds rest the moment it stops applying for Allah's job.